Next of kin have been notified. We understand that process is still underway, so for obvious reasons we won't be hearing from Defence until after that has finished. We're taking you live now, though, to the opposition leader, Tony Abbott. He's speaking in Melbourne.
Look, it's good to be here at the Marsh Foundation. I want to thank David and Claire Marsh for making myself and Peter Hughes and Paul Anasich so welcome today. Peter Hughes, of course, was part of the 2002 Bali bombing. Paul Anasich was part of the 2005 Bali bombing. I always feel a bit emotional when I see Paul because I happened to be in Bali with my family on holiday at the time of the 2005 bombing and spent a fair bit of time on that terrible day with Paul's wife Penny and the other Australian victims before they were airlifted out later that evening. Paul and I have been in close contact over subsequent years, and back in 2009, as a result of discussions with Paul, I first introduced a private member's bill to provide for a scheme of compensation for the Australian victims of overseas terrorism analogous to the existing state and territory victims of crime compensation schemes. Now, that bill lapsed in the last Parliament. I reintroduced it in the current Parliament as opposition leader. The government, to its credit, eventually decided to adopt the bill, but unfortunately the government has never made the declarations necessary for retrospective operation of the victims of terrorism scheme, and that means that the victims of Bali in 2002, the victims of Bali in 2005, the Australian victims of the World Trade Centre atrocity, the London bombings, the two Jakarta bombings, have not received any compensation over and above the medical expenses that were dealt with at the time. Now, we're about to celebrate or commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Bali bombing, the first Bali bombing on October the 12th this year. I think that it would be a very fitting way to mark the 10th anniversary of this tragedy if the government were to make the appropriate retrospective declarations so that all of the Australian victims of overseas terrorism acts or their next of kin can receive this important but modest help. I think it would be a mean-spirited nation that would refuse this kind of modest assistance to the Australian victims of terrorism or their next of kin. If it's right and proper, as I believe it is, for the victims of domestic crime to be assisted in this way, I think it's right and proper for the victims of overseas terrorism to be assisted in this way. As I said, I've moved legislation in the Parliament as a private member. Today I've written again to the Prime Minister requesting that the government make the necessary retrospective declarations. I hope the Prime Minister will listen to the plea that I make today and that is echoed by Peter Hughes and Paul Anasich on behalf of the victims of terrorism, and should no action be forthcoming, I intend to take further steps in the Parliament when the Parliament goes back in September. But we've got 300 Australians who were killed or badly injured in these terrorist atrocities overseas. They were targeted purely and simply because of who they were. They were targeted because they were Australians by terrorists who hate what our country stands for and who hate the things we live by. And I think it's only right and proper that a dutiful and respectful nation should give these people the assistance that is the least that they deserve under all the circumstances. Peter or Paul, would you like to add anything? No. Okay. Well, you don't feel you have to, mate.
I can only support what you say, of course, Tony. And when you first mentioned this to me those years ago when you came to Newcastle, as you know, I thought immediately of the children of the people who were with me and were killed, who I thought could just get a a little kick along in life if this scheme was approved. Times moved on. The boys of whom I was thinking are now at university and so on. I've got to know better the other family who's lost their mother, and those children are also growing up. But they're in the process now of buying houses and doing things like that, and I only think of them and think every day this must be on their minds when they awake, that they're the victims of this tragedy. It must be so tough on them.
Yeah. Okay, do we have any questions?
Just on dental health.
Look, could we take questions on this subject first, and if there are other subjects, well then I'll deal with them. Any questions on the subject of victims of terrorism?
I guess I'll ask about the 10 years. Seems like a long time, but what kind of help can someone who has been a victim, receive 10 years down?
Well, look, obviously there is the standard help that is available to people who are doing it tough, and I think that's right and proper. I think that with the 10th anniversary of the first Bali bombing coming up, all Australians will be more mindful than ever of just what the people went through who were caught up in that terrible day. And it's not just those who were personally injured or those who personally lost loved ones. If you look at the Marshes, for instance, they were involved as helpers. If you look at people like Dr. Adam Frost, who was an Australian doctor who I spent the day with at Sanglar Hospital back in 2005, all of these people have been caught up in it, and all of them carry the scars, and I think it's important that we are conscious of that, and we do everything we can to reach out to people at a difficult time, and that's why I think it would be very fitting if we were to mark this tragic anniversary with the retrospective declarations that I now call upon the Prime Minister to make. Yep. Well, I think we can obviously question the Prime Minister in question time as to why the government is not proposing to deal with the victims of past terrorist acts the way it is proposing to deal with the victims of future terrorist acts. I hope there are no future terrorist acts directed against Australians, but we know there have been previous terrorist acts directed against Australians, and they should be appropriately acknowledged and dealt with. I think it would be appropriate for the Parliament to consider a resolution calling on the Prime Minister to make the appropriate retrospective declarations. Okay, now Paul and Peter, you may not want to be part of the general political discussion. Okay, all right. Okay, other topics.
Does the coalition support finding a way to fix children's oral health?
The coalition has a very good record in this area, and I was the health minister who introduced the Medicare dental scheme, and thanks to the Medicare dental scheme, hundreds of thousands of Australians have received Medicare funded dental treatment. And one of the very disappointing things is that rather than extending the Medicare dental scheme, the government wants to butcher the Medicare dental scheme, and I think that's a real pity. Now, we haven't seen any of the details of what the government has proposed, and I will wait until I've seen the details of what the government has proposed before commenting specifically on it. I don't think the way to improve dental health, though, is to axe the existing Medicare dental scheme. I've always said that it was the aspiration of the coalition, when the nation's finances permitted, to extend Medicare to cover dental treatment more generally. I've always thought that it was odd that Medicare should cover all parts of the body except the mouth, that Medicare should cover general health but not oral health. Now, as I said, the Medicare dental scheme was my attempt as Health Minister to end that anomaly, and I would like, when the budget is in much better shape than it is now, to extend that. But at the moment, we've got a diabolical budget position. The government has a $120 billion budget black hole because of commitments that it has already made. And my problem with what they are proposing is A, they are entering into unspecified new expenditures, and B, they are scrapping the one serious Medicare scheme for dentistry that exists.
As reported in this morning in the Financial Review today, it's been revealed that $120 billion will need to be found by either party by the end of the decade to pay for some of the commitments that they've made. What are the first areas in which the coalition will cut to find that money?
We will announce our fiscal plans in good time before the next election, but the coalition has a very good record when it comes to ensuring that government lives within its means. When we were last in government, we turned a $10 billion budget black hole into a $20 billion a year surplus. Surplus has averaged 1% of GDP almost for the life of the Howard government. We turned $96 billion of net Commonwealth debt into $70 billion of net Commonwealth assets. So we've done it before, we can do it again. Going into the last election, we identified some $50 billion worth of savings, and while there is a serious fiscal challenge, we are up to it.
Times have obviously changed. There's been a global financial crisis. Can the coalition guarantee that all its promises are properly funded?
We will have all of our commitments fully funded, but I've also got to say to you that we will not be making a whole range of additional commitments. We appreciate that the fiscal situation that this government has created is dire. I mean, this is a government which has been spending like a drunken sailor, and the last thing we want to do is make a bad situation worse by going into the election with a whole shopping list of new promises. And I think the public understand that, to use a phrase, the reckless spending must stop. The public understand that, and certainly the coalition intends to demonstrate fiscal responsibility for the first, and that's what we need. We need fiscal responsibility, which we haven't seen for the last 4.5 years.
Where will the money come from for all the promises that you've got, though? You know, you said you'd be scrapping the carbon and the mining taxes, so where can the money come from?
From prudent, responsible savings. I mean, we've just seen the Prime Minister promise $350 million to promote women in Pacific Island nations' polities. Now, I'm all in favour of giving women a fair go. That's why we want a decent paid parental leave scheme. But I don't think anyone looking at the current government spending would say that this is a prudent, frugal government. If you look at the border protection disaster that this government has presided over, there's a $5 billion budget blowout so far, and there will be a $1.3 billion a year cost for the additional entrance which the government is now promising. So there are savings that can be made, and the coalition will make them.
In a letter to Julia Gillard, Premier Ted Baillieu has asked the federal government for tougher IR laws to punish unions that break the law. On top of reinstating powers to the ABCC, what do you think needs to be done?
Well, the Australian Building and Construction Commission was a tough cop on the beat, and while the Australian Building and Construction Commission was in place, we had industrial peace on building sites. It wasn't perfect, but it was much, much better than it is now. And the ABCC was responsible for about $2.5 million worth of fines being put on union officials who broke the law. Now, restore the ABCC with full authority, with full power, and with full resourcing, and once more we can have peace on our building sites.
Do you agree that the Fair Work Act doesn't include adequate sanctions to deter misconduct by unions and union officials who defy the law?
I've said for a long time now that under the Fair Work Act, we have seen a growing flexibility problem, a productivity problem and a militancy problem, and what we are seeing on the streets of Melbourne right now is a sign of this government's failure to ensure that the rule of law applies on building sites. No one is above the law. People who break the law must be prosecuted, they must be punished, and those punishments must be enforced. Well, I think that what we need is a tough cop on the beat. A tough cop on the beat. Now, I think it's perfectly open to the Premier of Victoria to apply for the deregistration of a union which is in flagrant breach of the law. But as far as the federal government is concerned, its failure has been to maintain a tough cop on the beat. They abolished the tough cop on the beat. We will restore the tough cop, put the tough cop on the beat, and it will be one of the urgent priorities of an incoming coalition government.
So should the list of prohibited behaviour by registered organisations such as unions be expanded to include breaches of state courts rather than just federal courts as it stands?
It is against the law to breach court orders. Anyone who breaches a court order is in contempt of court and can be punished.
So do you have any comment on the 3 soldiers that have been killed?
Look, this is a terrible, terrible tragedy. It is a black day for our Defence Forces. My understanding is that the Chief of the Defence Force, or the Acting Chief of the Defence Force, will be making a statement later today. I think it would be inappropriate for me to offer any specific comment in advance of the Acting CDF statement, but I do want to say this is a black day for our military forces, and our thoughts and prayers are obviously with those who have been killed and with their comrades and their families.
Is this another reason for Australia to pull out of Afghanistan?
I'm not going to offer any further comment. I think that for today, suffice to say that this is a black day for our military forces, and it is a tragic day for the families and the comrades of those who have been killed in action.
Just on the union dispute, do you think that there should be a fit and proper person test for union officials?
Look, I think the important thing is for the law to be enforced, and we've got to have a tough cop on the beat, and we've got to have appropriate sanctions for people who break the law. No one should be above the law. If someone breaks the law, they should be charged. Where found guilty, they should be fined. If they don't pay the fine, they should be jailed. The law has got to be enforced, and under Julia Gillard and Bill Shorten, militant construction workers and their union can break the law with impunity. That's just not on. Thank you.
The opposition leader, Tony Abbott, there speaking in Melbourne, describing today as a black day for our Defence Forces after we've just learnt that Australian personnel have been killed in the Oruzgan province in Afghanistan. The defence statement says personnel. We did hear earlier in the day that 3 coalition members had been killed in a green-on-blue attack. That is where an Afghan national dressed in an Afghan army uniform turns on the coalition forces that they are meant to be working alongside with. We are waiting for more details from the Defence Force today. While we wait, of course, Defence trying to notify next of kin before we get too many more bits of information. This did happen in the Oruzgan province. This is where around 1,500 Australian soldiers are stationed. Also a black day in Indonesia, as we've been reporting today. Another tragedy unfolding as we speak. We heard from the Home Affairs Minister, Jason Clare, just a little earlier. He confirmed that 6 people have been rescued. This rescue mission underway at the moment after a distress call yesterday morning alerted authorities to the fact that 150 asylum seekers were in trouble.